All right. Okay. Well, so we've got about 2 more minutes. So those of you sat just waiting on the live feed, we'll just wait for a couple of more people to get in. Now, while you're settling in, for those both on the panel and in the room, please have a look around the interface. There's some really great things you can get involved in just before we start. So if you look at the bottom, we have this poll section, and you can answer some questions so we can get a good survey of the people who are here today. There's also an opportunity to ask a question. So for those of you who are joining us, we'll be using that to get audience questions. So if you do want to get involved. I'm just going to play with the sound, as it sounds like we've got quite a lot of background noise. Where's that coming from? Okay. All right, perfect. Let's have a look how we're going. 1 more minute to go. Awesome. Right, okay, so by my watch, we're on about 6:30 now. If you are joining us from Australia, that should be about 4:30, give or take time zones. For the Kiwis, you're at 6:30, so I appreciate you taking a break from your dinner and your family routine of the evening, if that's your thing. And for those broader afield, we've even got somebody from Canada looking at the list. Hello, good day, good afternoon, good morning. Whatever time it is you are introducing yourself to this video, I hope this finds you well. Now, tonight we are really excited to introduce this group of people and this panel. Now, tonight's panel is Building a Secure Development Culture at Speed. And at SafeStack Academy, this is what we live and breathe day to day, but what we wanted to do was facilitate a bit of lessons learned, shared between some people who've been doing it for a long time, and like many of us have learned the hard way and have learned some good things on the way. So lots of hopefully good anecdotes and good tips that we've shared. We've got some questions to ask and to get answered. Now, before we kick off, just to reiterate, please feel free to use the Ask a Question button at the bottom if you do have a question you would like to put to the panel. And we can see those, so please don't be shy. Please answer those polls. It gives us a nice idea of the types of people attending and the types of needs they might have. We are recording this, so if you want to share it with your team afterwards, you are more than welcome to. And we even annotate the questions in there, so you'll be able to see as you're playing it back and jump to the bits that are most relevant. Now, as with all online type things, please mind, we're all at home. There may be extra special guests along the way, but you know what? Life is like that. So we will just adapt and we will get through it. So hopefully you'll have a great time. You're going to learn something to take back to your teams and perhaps even have some suggestions or questions yourself. So without further ado, my name is Laura Bell. I'm the founder and CEO at SafeStack Academy. I've been helping teams go very fast in new development for about a decade now, which makes me feel very old. But I'm joined tonight, it's my absolute privilege to be joined by Hannah McKelvey from Telstra, Lysander Borgia from ASP Bank, and Edwin Kwon from Tyro. Now, I'm going to go around and get them to introduce themselves a bit, and then we're going to jump into our questions and our discussion. So, Hannah, can I start with you?
You absolutely can, and thank you so much for welcoming us and including us in this session. These are some of my favorite people to hang out with, so this is a great afternoon for us here. My background, I started out in a software development lab, one of IBM's finest in the UK, and transitioned through various roles in IT, ultimately finding myself in security. And it's amazing that what really gets me fired up these days is breaking down the barriers between security and development teams. I don't yet know where that passion has come from. I think having a background in cognitive science has helped in some way. The sort of the empathy that I feel for people and what they need to do a really great job. And yeah, I just thoroughly enjoy my pocket of life in Telstra, where it's really about enablement. And we have not got that primary responsibility for guarding the perimeter and making sure the front door is always shut and the burglars don't come and nick your television. There are rafts of people in Telstra who can take care of that. And our focus is really on how can we do things to really enable people, productivity, quality. And so it's a nice area that I love playing in.
Awesome, fantastic. And I'm really excited to hear more of that passion come through when you're telling your stories as the panel goes on. Lysander, we're going to jump to you next.
Yes, yeah, thanks for having me in this session, actually, Laura. Yeah, so I'm Lysander. I actually work in the cyber assurance team in security practice inside ASB Bank. I've been there for actually just over 10 years. And I've had a very interesting journey from the beginning, actually. I started there as a graduate, primary security, and I've sort of seen the evolution of, I guess, how, Agile has impacted the bank, how things need to be delivered at pace, and also how do we find balance between, juggling things like regulatory requirements, but whilst also being able to work with developers and like Hannah said, it's just breaking those barriers down and making sure that we can actually live in a coherent world.
Yeah, that's a really great mission. I'm sure that's one that's shared by the whole group here. Edwin, would you like to, round us out with a bit of an intro?
Yes, I'm very happy to be here.
Edwin, I think we're having a bit of sound trouble on your end. I'm just going to toggle your mic gently and just check that comes back. Okay, give it another shot. Just about. There's a lot of distortion. Ladies and gentlemen playing along at home, I'm sure you have a complete empathy for the situation, as it happens to me at least once a day. Oh, we can hear you. Let's roll with it.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll give it a shot. So my opening point, I look after business activities. So I started out in Tyro. Years ago. I thought I was a software but every time I Tyro, we did it doesn't
I think we're having some technical difficulties here with Edwin. So what I might get you to do, Edwin, is you want to reconnect and just have a crack at your audio settings. What I wanted to do, just while we're doing that, is what I like about this group is that, we've got Hannah here from Telstra, so huge organization, massive amount of resources. We've got Lysander from, a large New Zealand bank, but by global standards, still relatively medium-sized, smaller set of resources. Edwin's from Tyro, high growth company, moving very fast, growing from very, very small to larger very quickly. And I've worked a lot with everyone from, one engineer upwards. And so I feel between us, welcome back, Edwin. We have actually this breadth of experience. So, much better. You sound beautiful. So we have this breadth of experience that's going to let us have lessons and perspectives that aren't just you have to have a dedicated team of 20 people. There's going to be a bit for everyone. So no matter what your background and size, I'm hopeful that we have something to share. Edwin, I'm going to let you have another final crack at this intro. We can do it.
All right, let's see how I go this time. So I joined Tyro about, I think, 8 years ago as a software engineer. And at that time, Tyro wasn't a bank yet. We were just an acquiring company. So we were just doing card payments. And we were working towards getting our full banking license. And the story behind that was that when Tyro started, I think back in many years ago, we were given a temporary license to work in the acquiring space. And that license was coming up when I joined. And we were given the options to either continue operating, but under another bank that has an ADI license, or to become a bank ourselves. And because of that, I guess your attack surface area or your exposure surface area is much greater as a bank as compared to a card payment where you control the terminals, you control all the back end. And we needed to very quickly ramp up our security maturity. So that's where that journey came along. We were all fully agile, deploying every 2 weeks. Didn't want to compromise any of that while building our systems to get our banking license. And that was where the challenge was. It was all about how do we say yes? How do we enable security such that we can empower developers with the information that they need to actually build secure systems, provide fast feedback in the build pipeline, to continue delivering securely. So that was a really good journey. We've got our banking license now. We're still going strong. We're now doing continuous delivery where every commit is a deploy. And we're still practicing our AppSec practices. So I'm pretty happy of that.
Awesome. You know, what I love about the Tyro story is the idea that you just kind of wake up one day and go, you know what, the easiest route is I'm going to build a bank. Any story that starts with, let's build a bank has got to be an exciting one at the end. So let's start off with a kind of a bit of, some of the questions that we have here. And just to remind for those people who've joined us a little bit later, I see we've got quite a few new people on. Don't forget to join in with the polls at the bottom, or if you have a specific question for the team, please use the Ask a Question function and we'll be able to then pass those on and answer those directly. Now, what I'm going to ask as our first question to the team is, I'm going to start in that usual kind of difficult question sense is, what's the hardest lesson you've learned on this journey? So we all love a good success story, right? It all succeeded. We all won. We deployed 20 million times a day. Yay, wonderful, all done. But what was the hardest learned lesson that you've found on the way? And what did you take from it? Do you want to go, Lysander? Oh, Edwin, fabulous.
I thought you were going to call someone out to pick someone up. But the hardest thing for us when we started our journey was we've got SafeStack in to do SDLC assessment. We got all these action items. And we're like, hey, we know exactly what we needed to do to get where we wanted to be. And the lesson that we learned very quickly, and it still holds true today, it's you need to kind of talk about the value, the why. Why are we doing this? Because when we started off by trying to essentially put gates, right? Like, hey, we should make sure this checklist is there, do that. And we try to put some controls here and there. And we felt that everything we do met with resistance from the team. There was a huge outcry. And in Tyro, we say that we're a tech company with a banking license, and the technology company has a lot of say in this. So there's a lot of pushback from the engineering team when you try to do something without talking about a why. And what we've learned, and what we discovered when we pivoted to focus more on the awareness, the education, and talk more about the problem space rather than this is the controls or these are the gates, we start seeing them coming up with innovative solutions to actually get us to the same outcome without all the negative side effects for that particular path they were trying to take them through. So they almost took ownership of the problem itself and said, hey, we can still get the same outcome by doing it this way. That was the one thing. That was that light bulb moment when we hit that during our journey, going, let's include them and kind of talk about why we're trying to do this and get them involved in the solution rather than saying this is what we're doing at Tyro.
Absolutely. And from my perspective, that letting go of the controls and focusing on the why and empowering people was actually really terrifying because, I'm used to going, well, we have a control, so we're safe now. And stepping back and just giving people the skills and the empowerment to do that was actually quite counterintuitive from if you've come like me from a more traditional security background. Hannah, how about you?
I think you alluded to this when you were positioning the size of Telstra. For those who may not know, we've got several thousand developers working in multiple locations, and turning large enterprises around, it does feel like turning an oil tanker. And I was joking with a colleague the other day, oh, and by the way, we're stuck in ice. So for me, a lot of it was having to tee things up in a certain sequence, knowing who to influence, what financial cadence to hook into to get the business case to be able to set some things in motion. And also to pace that and make sure that at every step of the way, the thing that you've come up with as your, oh my gosh, this is my brilliant idea, whether that's coming from within security or development, to then present some value at the end of it. So we didn't just do it because it was shiny and fun. We did it because somebody in the team or the whole unit felt that it was worthwhile. So kind of lining up the ducks to get that sequence to unlock you to get to the next level and to the next level. In the early phases, that was hard, and it's also quite new territory because we go back, our journey starts sort of mid 2016, and it really was on the front foot of DevSecOps. So yeah, trying to convince people of some new ideas, new ways of doing things, and having to go through the financial hoops of a national, huge organization can be quite exhausting. I think my biggest claim to fame right now is persistence and resilience, which, to be fair, is probably the rest of the world thanks to 2020. But yeah.
Yeah, but perhaps we all got a strange crash course in how to drive security awareness and culture without really realizing it. Lysander, what about from your perspective? What have been your hardest lessons learned?
Yeah, I think from our side, so primarily because we had a security team, we were, I guess, once segregated from our developers. We were physically in a different building, and I think there was always this perception that we had to try and essentially just break down that, we're actually still people. We actually do care. Historically, in the past, we would, we'd get our successes by saying, "Hey, we found some issues. Here's a report. Good luck." And essentially changing that perception of how we need to operate now is actually, I guess, one of the hardest things in the beginning, anyway. So we've had to essentially move to a different location. We're actually next to the developers now. It's very pre-COVID anyway. It's much easier for people to walk up to us and actually have a conversation. Those barriers are no longer there, and essentially just changing that perception of what we historically were like, and most people saw us as us sitting in Eiffel Tower and just saying, "Hey, you must do this standard, you must do this control," and actually just changing that was quite the challenging part. But yeah, it's definitely changed, and I think that's probably one of the, I guess, whilst it was hard, it was also a success in a way.
There's definitely some echoing themes coming through here, a reflection, if you will, of how application security has changed in this last decade, of that, focusing on why this matters and empowering and communicating rather than dictating, and becoming that trusted advisor role. Now, looking at each of your spaces, you're each at different scales and have been on different journeys for different amounts of time. Now, when you're building up the secure development culture, particularly in your environments, what are the key tools and initiatives that you found worked really, really well? And if you can also think of ones that were like, "Oh God, this sucked," I do love a good horror story, so feel free to share those too. I'm going to start with Hannah this time, ladies first.
So yes, tools and initiatives to bring about the culture. We started out with the tools. We actually did an internal assessment to prove the need for a secure code function in the first place. So we actually got an external company to come in and do a review, probably not too dissimilar to maybe how you might have worked with Edwin and his team, to see, what is the software development lifecycle like in the enterprise and where are the gaps? And it was a bit like, oh my God, are there any non-gaps? So we started out by mapping from the sort of objective findings of an external company into the different tools we could slot in, and started with scanning our code. So a SAST technology came through, and everything we did had to be done enterprise grade at scale. So there was the whole authority to operate, and a bazillion teams had to review and assess your design. Hey, hashtag security teams are hard to deal with. So we had to sort of eat our own dog food, I think, is the expression. Then we moved on to SCA, so those third-party libraries, and set up a fairly cool and groovy new technology there that subsequently got bought out. And I just loved working with the two different groups. So the first team, fairly established, mature product. The second team in the SCA space was, brand new and startup. That was fun. And then the third one that we started to look into was secrets management. So peeling through those kind of foundational components. But we know that that allows a certain amount of autonomy and independence amongst the developer teams. It doesn't necessarily mean they'd go any faster unless you give them a whole ecosystem. So we then looked at things like a fast path pipeline. So what could we do to give you a preferred route and path into production? And it would be great if we didn't have a proliferation of every possible CI/CD permutation and combination that you could find. But then you also don't want to constrain creativity, and the autonomy aspect's really interesting. So I tried to find sort of a fast path way through, but then still that didn't complete the picture. And the final thing for us, the evolution, was to the Security Champion Program, which is supplanting the passionate few, the ambassadors who would like really prioritize security debt in in their scrums, maybe even do a security moment at the start of a stand-up to say, hey, I read about this in the news. And over time, we've loaded more and more responsibilities onto the shoulders of the champions as well, to really kind of help cut the ties between everything must go through security to only things for exceptional cases or really critical, hairy, scary stuff would need to go into security. And that's the path that we've taken through. The security champion one, I think we can explore in later conversation, but it's interesting that we ended up having to go big bang rather than a small pilot approach and expansion, which is what I initially thought we would do. So maybe we can dive into that as how that panned out for us.
Absolutely, and security champions, I think, is definitely going to be something that I'd love to dig into a little bit more detail as the evening progresses. Thank you for that. The thing that I know will be intimidating to those of you who are listening or who've joined us today who are in smaller teams is it sounds really expensive what you're saying, and I'm going to loop back to that. So a bit of a conversation later. If you were at the other end of the scale and didn't have that budget, what are the things we might be able to do that would get us started in that direction? So we'll come back to that afterwards. So Lysander, what from your side have been the tools or initiatives that have helped ASB on its secure development journey?
So we had definitely a number of things. Training was definitely a big part. So we, I guess one of the key challenges that we had when it came to a review is actually, coming back to that, why is security important with your security, your development? And one of the things to try and actually get developers to understand these things is actually just to train them. So we had a number of things that we did. Basically, these training sessions just enable them to understand what the OWASP top 10 are. Some of these breaches that we should probably care about. And so what that enabled us to do is basically have an easier conversation when we actually do these reviews with them. It became much simpler. They sort of started to understand why you need to do these things. In conjunction with that, we also ran, we introduced SaaS tools. So historically, that was just, run primarily inside the internal security team, but that did not scale at all. So as our developers got more enabled, we decided to shift some of these things left and actually give it to them to start to use. And then as they started consuming it, alongside some of that training, they started to understand what these findings meant and why actually they needed to address it. Threat modeling also got a bit of some traction, especially with the architecture team. Getting into that design phase and actually thinking about, what can go wrong here, was quite important. Quite often we found, and in the past, is we would be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, where something would, hey, we got to go live tomorrow. But when you're inherently a design flaw, this is something that probably could have been addressed much earlier.
I think we're losing a little bit of sound there. Just checking in. Can you still hear me, Hannah and Edwin? Awesome. Okay, we might have to pop back to Lysander when his connection picks up. Edwin, your initiatives on your side.
Yes, so I think like Hannah and Lysandra, we did training first. So it's all about awareness to begin with. We got people to do like an OWASP top 10 training, but where we really got traction, because when we were doing those training, the feedback that we got was, this OWASP top 10, they're really good things, but we don't do that. We us as developers don't make those mistakes. And I guess what really changed was when we started adapting the training to put Tyro context in there, kind of going, these are the vulnerabilities like that code that we have in this application that we discovered in the previous year. And there was one year I remember, it was early 2016, and I did a presentation to the entire development team, and it was titled "How to Hack Tyro Like It Was 2015." And we spun up all the systems. Obviously, everything has been patched when I did that presentation, and kind of just showed everybody how you could actually use a few simple vulnerabilities and pivot through them to get access to our crown jewels. And what we discovered from that was there was a lot more buy-in. People actually going, oh shit, yeah, this actually applies to us. So what really worked for us was actually targeted awareness. So we have a base level kind of training for new starters, or when we kick the program off, that's very targeted using code that's very, I guess, Tyro lookalike. So you understand how this applies to you. And we talk about defensive programming quite a bit. But every year when we do some sort of refresher with everybody, it's almost like a CTF where we have some systems with Tyro-like vulnerabilities. And these are all based off the previous year's pen test, where we would see what is Tyro's top 10, what are the things that we are seeing in the previous year, and we try to incorporate them into the curriculum for the new year. So that has been quite successful for us from the awareness piece. From the technology piece, we've done like what Hannah has done, which is like the SCA scanning, the SES scanning. Some of those are more successful than others. We were a microservice, we deploy microservices, so our build times were in the order of minutes, less than 10. And when we first introduced these scanning tools, we were essentially doubling their build time. And there was just outcry everywhere going, my 10-minute build is now 20 minutes. I have to wait twice as long for my build. So that took a lot of going back to the why we're doing this to help with that. And what we also learned, we did have a lot of success with static code analysis in terms of enforcement, just because we had things that had a lot of false positives. And we find that you have only a few attempts with gaining a developer's trust in a particular tool. And after a few false positives, they kind of lost trust in our SaaS tool as much. So we had to kind of abandon that whole program, and we respun up using a lot of the open source one, Find SecBugs, and we actually contributed to that. And we took away all the things that were having high false positives, and we tried to incorporate new detective, kind of what they call them now, like things to detect, targeted towards the things that were key to us. So that we had some success in there. But one of the things that was really useful for us was just in terms of vulnerability management, because a lot of times we're now no longer building code, we're actually assembling open source components that we're taking from everywhere. And we don't have very, I guess the systems that we have, all the open source that we're using has a lot of vulnerabilities in them that keep coming in, even after you deploy it and it's in production. So you're no longer actively building, you still have vulnerabilities being discovered on those systems. So one thing that was quite successful for us was we've introduced something called a service level objective, where based on the CVE, you have a certain amount of time that you need to fix those vulnerabilities. And we were able to put that into our SCA tool, where if those times were expired, your build would actually break in the build pipeline. So you actually have to fix them. And then we also have a reporting feature where we obviously report this to the team leads and all, but this was targeting the systems that weren't actively developed, hence the breaking of the build didn't really have, they went unnoticed. So those worked quite well for us. We tried the security champions. We struggled really hard with that, and we haven't had much success with that. We found that a security champion is a software engineer first and a security champion second. And whenever there's delivery schedules within the team and they're trying to meet a target, their primary hat takes precedence over the security hat. So that's where we struggle on a little bit. And at Tyro, we find that there are three things you can get a product. You can get it on time, fully featured, fully secure, but you can only pick two. So it's all those compromises that we have to get in there. And that's the struggle that we have sometimes.
Yeah, awesome. I think we're going to dig into that security champions thing a little bit more shortly, because I think firstly, we've got a question from Alice, which we will get to your question, Alice. Thank you so much for posting that about rewarding security champions. But also, we're going to talk about the differences in the approaches you've taken, because I know there's a lot of different ways to do it, especially if you're smaller or if you're distributed over global expanses like you are, Hannah. Lysander, from your perspective, so we did cut you off halfway through. I think we had a good handle on your tooling and initiatives. Was there anything else you wanted to add just before we move on? You're on mute, my love. Oh, let's see if we can.
How's that?
Much better.
Much better. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think I got to security champions before I actually dropped out. Yeah, one other thing that we also do, I guess, is we try to do these little road shows so frequently or not. Mainly because it's to, we get staff turning over, staff progress different roles or they leave the organization. So when you get new people joining, it's quite key to actually just launch it again, kind of thing. In the past as well, we've also had CTF, so actually getting the developers to participate in Capture the Flag. That's been pretty successful. But yeah, things like COVID obviously slowed those kind of things down, and we have to rethink how to operate, I guess, remotely in that kind of space.
Awesome. Right, I think this is a good time for us to dig into the security champions thing. So for those of you who are playing along at home, this is a new concept. There is quite a lot out there. There's some great conference talks about the fundamentals. But it's the idea that you try and scale your security efforts by getting evangelists or champions or coaches in some organizations to be kind of security people as well as their full-time job. And there's lots of different ways to do it. Now, what I'd love to kind of hear from our panel tonight is, we're going to answer Alice's question of how do we reward security champions, because I think that's interesting. But also, how do you select them to begin with, and what does success look like for you in a security champions program? Edwin, would you like to start?
Yeah. So security champions, how do we select them? When we started off, the selection was having the team nominate someone to be a security champion. And what we find is that some teams have people who are security enthusiastic, so that was not a problem. Some teams didn't, so then the team lead would volunteer somebody. And I think that's where we struggle a little bit when we didn't have that. All security champions, what we do is we provide them more training as compared to everyone else. We provide more training for that. We do more share back in terms of the things they were finding from every pen test. Before we had the pandemic, we would also be working with other organizations, doing CTFs with them, doing share backs, and we would invite the security champions along. Maybe that's, you could say, as part of the reward incentive in there. But what they also have in terms of the reward, and this is where the team comes in, or the team dynamics comes in a bit. So if you have a security champion in your team, there are certain things that they can do that your team is not able to do without a security champion in there. So an example of that is if we go back to the SCA approach in there with the vulnerabilities in open source, if you feel that one of the vulnerabilities do not apply to your system because of the way you're using it, we allow security champions, after they've done the training, to go in there and kind of mark it as a false positive. If you can't do that because you don't have a security champion, then the other process is you have to reach out to the application security team. It's a little bit of a hassle, and obviously we put a bigger lens under it before we look at that kind of stuff. So it actually enables your team to do more self-serve. Same thing for threat modeling. With a security champion, they can help you run or facilitate a threat modeling session. The other ones that during your planning session will put on that hat to kind of ask those questions in there. So those are some of the benefits that you get. In the past, when we had conferences and all, like B-sides and audio conferences, we would, I guess, sponsor the security champions to attend for those. So those are some of the ways that we tried on there. But the biggest challenge, as I said, was for the teams. So maybe I should frame what the challenges are. For the teams where the security champions didn't volunteer, they were volunteered to become champions. So they weren't enthusiastic about it to begin with. And obviously, security was the second position for them. So it's a mixed bag. So some teams worked really well, some teams not as much. I can tell you what I would like to do, actually. We've started using some sort of a training platform for training. So in the past, training was more attendance-based, whereas now it's more assessment-based. So you could attend a security training, and you could still, we still might not mark you off as having completed the training because you failed the assessment. You didn't really demonstrate any improvement in your security understanding of application security concepts coming from that. So ideally, where we want to get is we want to treat security champions like your first aid certification, something that you get because you've made a certain criteria, and something that you have to either get CPEs or do some sort of a refresher every 1 or 2 years at some frequency to manage and maintain that kind of certification. And with that, you get those benefits where your teams are able to have someone on hand to help you. Hopefully, that's where the team gets perceived to benefit from. Help you triage some of your vulnerabilities that come in, and help you with some of the activities that you would otherwise have to reach out to the application security team to perform.
Awesome. I'm quite interested. I probably will end up connecting with you in a year and see how that works out with the CPEs and things, because I've not seen that approach before. So that's quite interesting, exciting. Lysander, ASB security champions. Are you doing things the same sort of way, or is it a little bit different? How do you select? How does it work, and how do you reward?
Yeah. So I guess the way we do it is a little bit more open. We kind of just said, well, security can be for anyone. Feel free to join. And what we, I guess, incentivize people to sort of attend is we provided sausage rolls and food so that they would attend these meetings. And I guess the approach that we've kind of done at the moment is we would run, a monthly comms where people would attend, and we might share, for example, an incident that might have happened, X months ago, and just give them a bit more detail about, what happened and, how we addressed it, and essentially just give them that background context, what they do on their day to day sort of impacts the overall posture of the bank. We give them T-shirts. They love T-shirts. They love swagger, drink bottles. So you get people basically walking around the building with these T-shirts, which is really great to see. It's all sorts of colors. You get orange, yellow, black, whatever you want. And I think from our angle, it's also just having that, that person in those squads or teams where you can sort of reach out to and say, hey, we found something here that it could be an incident, or it could be disclosure, or it could be any one of those things. And we can sort of reach out to them and say, hey, we need an SME in this space. Are you able to help us out? Equally, they're also there to promote security. We expose things like training material for them. So when they see something that's odd, it becomes very easy for them to, reach out to us as well if they need those assistance. So yeah, that's kind of how we're running the program at the moment.
What I like about what we're learning so far in this panel is the variety of approaches, and also some key themes that come through without us really trying. So Lysander, you're talking there, echoed some of the things we mentioned earlier about almost rebranding security to be a visible and friendly and interactive piece that people want to be associated with, which are, honestly, from my professional history, as a security community, we've not always been good at that. And compared to Edwin's more formalized approach, where, obviously working at a different scale and budget set. And if you're listening along to this and you're from a different environment, just remember that there's no formula for this. There's no correct way of doing it. I'm sure Hannah's now going to show us a third way that this works, and the lessons worked from your scale. How does it work for you, Hannah?
Yeah, and I would encourage, the principle that we followed was really iterative. So to start somewhere and to keep adding things on with the goodwill and the visibility of your community. And this is, to me, the security champion domain, and instilling that culture of security in teams is one of the elements of cybersecurity as a discipline where you're an event manager, you're a marketing campaign, you're a comms specialist. So you can actually transition into the industry through this kind of a discipline and add phenomenal value to the lives of your colleagues across cybersecurity. So we started out back in 2018, and I thought we were going to get away with 6 pilot teams. And then I had a chat with our CISO at the time, and I feel like he had another problem that he was needing to solve that I would not have had visibility of. And he's like, yeah, about that small pilot, I think we're going to go big bang. I was like, oh, right, gotcha. And I feel probably it was coming down the visibility of the pipeline demand for SecArc, penetration testing, secure code, that bottleneck sense that was kind of very visible to the customers requesting our service. And when I say customers, I mean my internal colleagues in developer land. So I think he was like, being beaten up constantly, like, hey, escalations, review my stuff, I got to push to production. So one of the ways he envisaged the Champions program having a value for Telstra was this kind of big bang mentality that we're all in it together. It's a team sport. And it was, hey, how quickly can we sheep dip a bunch of people through some basic awareness? A lot of that, the OWASP Top 10 threat modeling really resonates with the courses that we run. So we established a tiered program, which is a little bit like always being one page ahead of the customer. So tier 1 was your foundational courses, and at the end of it, there is an assessment. So you actually get that sense of accreditation, and we give you a certificate with a little shiny gold sticker on it. Then there's tier 2, which is more advanced. Then there's sort of tier 3, and the idea was we would be able to land the course contents in a paced and timely manner, and people would progress through. We also gave people 4 months to complete the tier that they were in. So we have also had this situation where we said, we have to evict some people because they're dormant champions. That has actually helped us keep a very healthy community of people who do contribute and people who are proactive. As much as it hurts my heart to say, oh my gosh, there's a person who I feel like I can reach them still. Sorry, you're out. So there's been a bit of conflict for me there. Now, we started that very much from the secure code kind of mindset of let's improve security, focusing on software engineering teams. What we've discovered over time is it was a bit of a glass ceiling that we'd built in terms of the assessments and the criteria to progress. You had to be a coder. And that meant that people were hitting this kind of challenge. How do I progress? I still have value to add. So we've shifted very recently to a roles-based approach. And actually, you're probably the first to hear this because we're going to launch it towards the end of next week, the new revamped roles-based. And that will cater to perhaps a more generalist, someone who may be more on sort of infrastructure operations, plugging things together, because we live in a world where we've got network connections, routers, that kind of kit, and then also the software engineering stream. We also have done a whole sort of kind of healthy campaigning on the side. So we established a community through Microsoft Teams, Yammer, that kind of platform, comms platform. And it's supposed to be a dialogue. It's supposed to be two-way conversation. This is not security has now got the foghorn or megaphone to just blast whatever random thing they want developers to do this month. It's supposed to be we get more awareness of what developers are trying to do, and they get more awareness of what security is expecting from them at every phase of their life cycle. So they don't suddenly get to the point of, oh, what? I need a pen test? Oh, there's a 3-week lead time on one of them? Ooh. So it's much more, hey, you're a champion. You understand the life cycle of the security assessments. We're going to kind of need to get you guys through and when to submit your request to not have, miss your deadlines. We've used the champion program to recruit into security. So some of our absolute rockstar champions have used this to prove their value, their demonstrable skill. So much so we've hired one, and John Anthony in my team is an absolute rock star. He's brilliant. So it's so nice to find a way to transition a senior software engineer with 0 security runs on the board into the security team. Because his domain knowledge and context of the company is huge. And that's really high value for the security team. We started really big in terms of rewarding. We went for drones. We got to make this thing very appealing. So we do frequent secure code tournaments, which is kind of that gamification. And I always make sure the theme is not the dark hat hoodie themes. So we have like sports themes or Star Wars themes or rainbow and unicorn themes, stuff that the family members amongst us might be more familiar with rather than the Matrix and the padlock and all that kind of branding. We have an annual reward ceremony or award ceremony where we get the head of software engineering and the head of security to read through the achievements of nominated champions. And this is two-part. Number one, the champions get visibility amongst their peers, and there's a community of almost 900 champions in Telstra. So this is really good for your visibility and cross-pollination of your relationships with other people. But it also makes your head of security and head of software engineering read all this stuff and like, oh, wow, people are doing really good things. Oh, maybe this security champion stuff's working. I'll invest in this for one more year, So the awards is great to inspire your leadership that what you're doing is really good, and to also give great recognition to the folks and at the personal level. Swag, yep, t-shirts, bottles, fidget spinner things, anything like that's always gone down well. And right now, and maybe this might be another line of query, what do you do with a champion when you've got one? Because people are now knocking on my door saying, hey, I'm level 3 maturity champion, ticked all the boxes, passed all the tests. Why are you treating me like everybody else when I rock up at the security front door? Like, surely I get something for all this study and this skill. What is it? Is it a free pass? Is it independence? And so we're looking at this mission around the matrix of delegated responsibilities and accountability and how that shifts. And the things that are hard, like those of you running the SAST and the SCA platforms, you deal in a world of users and workspaces and projects and teams. How do you correlate that to the asset that they're actually working on? So to be able to free off the security team and to delegate that authority, you have to be able to say, I've got a level 3 champion at my front door. Wonderful. What's the maturity of the team that they're in? Are they, we have a maturity assessment questionnaire that we run frequently with the teams. Are they low maturity, high maturity? What's the asset they're working on? If they're talking about something that's going to plug into the core network, the potential to destroy Telstra's reputation and the service is huge versus, I don't know, some little app somewhere that's no PII. And so the asset you work on, the assurance level of the asset, the skill of the individual champion or champions in the team, the overall maturity of the team with regards to quality, testing, security, all those many dimensions of maturity. It all builds you the profile of the person coming knocking for time and help from security, and it allows your security team to make a sensitive call as to, you guys are independent, you've got security conscious leadership, 2 thumbs up, have at it. We'll see you for your random to be scheduled pen test. So we're headed in that direction. I know I've painted a sort of a coherent story, and we are partway through elements of that. So
awesome. What I'm appreciating as we get through this is the openness you all have and the authenticity in sharing what's working and what's not. Because, we've all seen the conference talks of, here's my Security Champions program and it's all amazing and you should do one too. But it really isn't as simple. And what we should be seeing from all of these stories is it really has to be customized to your environment, to your constraints, to your risk model, and to the culture of the existing engineers that are there. Now, just a little thing for those who are watching along. We're into the last 10 minutes now, so I would encourage you, if you're going to ask your questions, use the Ask a Question button at the bottom. We are happy to answer all your questions, or just stick them in the chat if that's easier. And don't forget to answer the polls before you go, because all of these little bits of data help us understand our audiences a little bit better, make sure these are as useful as possible. Now, I want to round out with my favorite question of the list tonight. Now, you've all been really great in describing your programs and your projects and all the things that your organizations have been wonderfully supportive of and had budget for. But I want you to kind of stick your imagination hat on for a second, if you will. And for those who are joining us who may watch this later, who perhaps their organization's at the start of their journey, or they're smaller, or they have less budget, or they're in the not-for-profit space, there's all those drivers. If you didn't have a big budget or specialists, what can organizations do that would get them on their way? And what would you, if you had to prioritize what you do as your first things, what would you get stuck into first? I'm going to let the mob decide who goes first. They who giggle first goes first. Lysander,
all right,
well done.
I'll go. I think definitely start small.
I've literally written that, start small.
Start small. I think it's quite important to be able to show something that you can definitely achieve as well. If you can show that value to upper management and actually just show them, hey, actually there's some benefit in doing some of this stuff, then you can, and getting that upper management buy-in is definitely very helpful. Set something that's definitely achievable. There's a lot of tools that you can integrate if you want to start there. A lot of training material, the OWASP website, for example, tons of things that you can reference in there. Make friends with your developers or make friends with the security person, and actually, start breaking things down and say, hey, what's actually some of the challenges that you're facing? Can we work on something really small and then just add some value to it? And then if you can show that there's some benefits to it, I think that's definitely the start of the program. I think one thing to keep in mind is it's definitely a journey. There's no end goal to this. You're going to continually to just improve as you go, and that's essentially what it's all about.
Awesome. I love that, Lysander. Taking it small and remembering it's a journey. It can be quite frustrating. If you've come from an engineering background, you like to be done. We literally have definition of done. When am I done with this? Application security doesn't have done. We're never done. I'm not entirely sure why we all do it sometimes. Hannah, what are your suggestions?
Oh, I was thinking, I think a lot of places, when you're in a team of one or sometimes half, because you're also the ops person and you're also the sysadmin, I feel that starting from some kind of a framework or even just standards, that's step one. Like, do you know what good looks like and what you're willing to accept, and map that out? And sure, we have 14 individual information security standards in Telstra, including one dedicated to application security. And that's because we have a massively hybrid, huge estate that we take care of. So maybe distill some meaningful standards for you, and then start figuring out how you could check whether people are going to meet that standard, yes or no. What might be the most important ones to you? Acknowledging you can look at industry stats like X percentage of applications are composed of open source libraries people tend to reuse rather than built from scratch. More microservices are going to be written in the next 5 years than have been in the last 40 years, or some random soundbite from insert conference attendance here. But yeah, once you've got that, can you find a way to crawl across your code and your assets? So what do you have and where is it? And from there, I think that might help you with, or a common set of languages are, this open source tool kind of scans for them relatively well. That will help me check my compliance with this particular standard, which is really important to me. And then the other thing is the measure and the monitor aspect, not to beat people up, but to see that health and that behavior of who you're working with. And maybe that's the easy bit to not do, but maybe for the long term, if you can invest just an hour or two a week to figure out people's trending and performance over time, whether, if they're trending up, leave them alone, go and do your other job. If they're trending down, is it a LinkedIn learning module? Is it a guest appearance from Edwin to come and inspire the troops? Something like that. So those would be my ideas.
Awesome, fantastic. And we're going to dig into some of those open source suggestions linked to our question in just a moment, because I know that some of you would be really keen for some of the free or open source tools you might be able to use for this. Edwin, what would be your suggestions?
Both of them have really good suggestions in there. Both of them have great suggestions. I love the idea of what they have. My approach would be all about buying from the top, by doing some sort of benchmarking, using the OAuth set to say, this is where we want to be, and this is where our gaps are, to kind of be able to justify, these are the areas we're going to want to invest in first, because you're starting small. Where can we get the most gain, and where are we lagging behind a lot? And then buying from the people who are involved in securing the system, from the developers all the way up, just awareness, some sort of awareness, training. That's where I would start. And then from there, we might talk about tooling to help reinforce in terms of, this is what we're gonna do to get us there. And it has to be something that has to be providing feedback to developers, low false positives. That's what I've learned. And it has to be built into the pipeline, and you have to empower developers to self-serve on this, to kind of go, this is what you want to do because it's going to help us with this. And two, I guess, senior management, this is why we're putting it, because we want to address this gap in this benchmarking that we've done, and this is where we want to get in a year's time. So I would use that benchmark as the guiding light in terms of which area to focus with, but always doing the awareness bit and picking 1, 2 at a time to get to at least where you want to be for each section before you move on to the next. So that's my approach if you are small or starting out,
And it's
rather
like
than going all out.
It's like the small business owner. You don't want to have to just be the person that has to turn up to get paid as well. If you can build self-sustaining pockets that do your job for you whilst you're absent, whether that's a community or whether it's, I don't know, interesting information presented to a dashboard so people can actually benchmark their performance against other teams. So you kind of gamify the land a bit for, oh, well, we don't want to be bottom of the heap. So, there's little things you can do to build the addiction to security, the interest in security, and that can be all happening in the dark whilst you're asleep kind of thing.
I
That's
do
really
like the
interesting.
robot army. That's awesome.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I guess if you gamify in that sense that you get all these metrics and measures and you make it available to kind of go, hey, these are your companies and your teams, and these teams have that many vulnerabilities compared to that team, and maybe you gamify and kind of going, well, we should be doing something about that and try and drive the number of open issues or any vulnerabilities down, and maybe that might drive itself.
The only thing I'd probably add on that is to make sure your environment is safe if you're going to have that level of transparency and competition, so that people feel like even if they are bottom of the heap, that they're safe to try and progress and say, hey, this is hard and I don't know, because that safety element really drives that community engagement.
And you can do relative performance. You don't need to expose team and username. It can literally be the average line is here. You guys are currently above or below. How do you feel about that? And that's that psychological motivation if we want to pull our socks up. And the funny net result, if everybody wants to do better, is the average improves. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we've got a few minutes left. What I'm going to ask is just to get us to answer the question that we've got from the crowd. And that is if we have any suggestions for tools, preferably open source or free, given the audience. So are there any standout tools that you would suggest people go and get stuck into? That could be a framework or a document, or it could be a tool itself. So for me, I'm going to kick off. I think if you were going to do what Edwin's suggesting and do a bit of a benchmark of yourself, then the places to start for me, a couple of the OWASP projects, flagships. One of them being the Application Security Verification Standard, which is a really great, easy-to-use way of validating basic controls on common patterns in your design, and the SAM project, which is about measuring your maturity. Both of which there are spreadsheets available, already pre-made, that you can populate with your answers, no money involved, and see where you're at. You don't need an expensive consultant to do that with you. So is there anything else from you lot that you would suggest people have a look at?
I feel a bit out of my depth here because I have the luxury of
budgets. Yeah,
budget.
Absolutely.
Not to say I don't have to fight tooth and nail for it every single year, and every single year there is the threat of turning it off, because when you do your job right, all the vulnerabilities are gone. So what are you for? I
feel like we could have an entire chat just about that, Hannah, and how to retain budget when you're succeeding in security.
Yeah, right. We'll do that.
So I'll add a couple more then, just because, given the crowd, I've probably got the most experience at the poor end of the space, or the more budgetally efficient, let's call them that. So things like we've mentioned today, source code analysis tools. You can use your linters as a security superpower. So many of the free linters out there can be reconfigured to look for common security anti-patterns. Do remember that GitHub has built-in dependency checkers now, Dependabot. And before that was a thing, OWASP had dependency checker that you could build into your pipelines. Even if you were using Ant for your build pipeline, there was an option for that. I think what we're saying here, there is a range of options out there. Don't worry too much if you don't have the budgets and scope of a whole team. There's lots of things you could have done today. We've pointed many of them out in our suggestions in the panel that aren't going to cost you anything. But remember, bite it off in chunks. Do it a little by little. And remember, you're never going to be done. So don't aim for that, because that's a recipe for disaster and disappointment. Any final words from you three, just to round out? Anything that you'd like to leave our audience watching with?
I guess what I would say is, Yeah. So what I'll say is don't get disheartened if you're starting this journey. Because I remember, and I'm sure it's the same for everyone else when you're starting out, it just feels overwhelming. It feels like everything is burning. Like where should I start first? And just start small, like do that benchmarking. And what I remember the first few years that you keep getting all the pushback from management, the pushback from the developers. And I guess my advice is be persistent, keep talking about the value, keep pushing. Don't be persistent in terms of the checkbox or the gates, be persistent in the value and the why and the awareness. And once you get to a tipping point, which for me was that presentation was where I noticed straight away the buy-in, where I wasn't pushing up a hill anymore. They were all behind me, helping me get to that journey too.
That's awesome, Edwin. Lysander, anything from your side?
Yeah, just you're not alone. There's definitely a massive community out there. We're all, I guess, in this together, in some way, some form or another. So yeah, reach out. There's communities out there you can attend. The AppTech conferences, for example, good resources there. You can connect with people, numerous talks that you can actually learn off as well. But yeah, you're not in this alone. And don't be like what Ethan said. Don't be afraid to start. And don't fear it as well. Take it on as a challenge.
Yeah, awesome. And just echoing that, community is so important. Connect with other people via social networks, via LinkedIn if you need to. Go out for a cup of tea if your country allows it right now and it's safe to do so. Or if not, grab a cup of tea and get on your webcam, because we've been doing that so well for a year. And just kind of sit down and say, hey, this is hard and this sucks. And I learned a thing today. And find the peers you can share that lesson with honestly. Hannah, anything to add from your side?
Look for allies, because you'll find them in remarkable places. And I just want to do a bit of a call out, and I'm sure there's a couple of us who are kind of a little bit in the Laura Bell fan club. I remember seeing you presenting very early on when I just decided to shift into security, and I was absolutely blown away because it opened my eyes to how security can be done, and it's not necessarily the first thing you Google that is InfoSec. So be curious, because you might find allies all over the place, and folks will want to transition and learn more, and you can learn together as a group of interested, invested individuals, and maybe you'll find your persistence and resilience through having friends and allies. And they can be anyone. Like Laura has taught me, anyone can inspire developers and testers to do great things.
Yeah, and never be afraid to speak to the people you've seen on that conference stage, because speaking honestly, as someone's been doing it a very long time, we are all making it up as we go along. And that's okay. And sometimes you just need to kind of reach out to people and say, hey, I like what you're doing, let's talk, because they might have as much to learn as you do. Right, we are at time. I am so grateful to all of our panelists tonight. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Lysander. You have been incredible for sharing your messages authentically and so openly. Thank you to all the people who watched live, and to, if you're watching this later as a recorded version, thank you for finding us in whatever time zone you're in. Hopefully there's something you can take away back to your life cycle. And what I would encourage you to do is share your stories. The more we talk about this and the more we share, the more we can all grow from it. So hopefully there'll be many more of these to come, where we try and share stories from around the world and different teams and different styles. And if you've got a suggestion or question, just reach out to any of our team. Maybe we can set up another panel that helps answer your questions. So thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. Take care.
Thank you so much, Laura. Cheers, Edwin. See you, Lysander.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you,
all.
everyone.